Who doesn't love Batman? I don't even know why I'm recording this. Welcome back to Cam's Corner. I'm Cam, I'm in the corner, and I'm here to talk about some books. I got my cup of tea, just wrapped up March. I'm gonna wrap up April now because I am doing this video in June, and I'm having to go back and try to collect all the books that I've read over the last 3 months, and I'm trying to break it into easier to watch videos so nobody's stuck watching for an hour and a half of me rambling. So get a cup of tea and come join me. Also, why is it always tea? What is it with book people and tea, but also coffee? I think it's just hot beverage. Okay guys, I have a twofer with this one. Oh, it's a beast. Let me do this. The Count of Monte Cristo, but also the Count of Monte Cristo. So let me explain, I'm gonna put this guy down. Let me explain why I have a 2-for-1 with this. So in April, I read for the very first time ever The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. I'm gonna say right now, before you click off this video and you go do something else, go read this book, 5-star book. I would give this 6 stars if that existed. You know what, it does exist because this is my channel. This is a 6-star book. Go get it, read it, it's amazing. It is my favorite book of all time now. That really shocked me. Honestly, I've had a favorite book since high school, and I could not believe that this beast of a book overthrew that. My other favorite book, which I'll probably talk about eventually in a later video, is also a beast of a book. It's probably actually almost as long as The Count of Monte Cristo. But I read this book on the recommendation from my mom, who had not read it, but really loved the story behind it and wanted me to read it and then tell her if it was as awesome in like the full book version. Oh, it was so much better. It was so much better. And the reason that I have this little guy is because you can tell, let's get it right here, unabridged, abridged. But with this guy, I got through so much of it that these two up front are just like the best quotes I've probably ever read, and so that I flagged them really early on just because they really, really spoke to me. But then I was like 80% of the way through the book before I was like, I gotta tab stuff. I didn't highlight in the book and I didn't write notes because I'm really weird. I don't like writing or highlighting in my books. I need pristine copies for reading. I don't know what it is. I am so weird about that. But I do love sticky notes, and I can sort of handle figuring out where this stuff is. But I got this far through the book when I could have started tabbing stuff on page like 5. The recurring themes in this book are so deeply interwoven in every aspect of it that I want to go back from the beginning and do an absolute deep dive and do the rest of my tabs through the rest of the book. So I did the next best thing. I got the abridged copy. And I also partly wanted to know, what could you take out of that beast of a novel and turn into this tiny little book by comparison, and is it going to be anywhere as good? The answer is yes. This is such a great story by such a great writer that you can lob out like, I don't know, 70%, and you still end up with a really great book. I will say, I'm gonna say 5 stars. We're gonna go back to 5. 6 is just too much. 5 stars for this. I would say the abridged copy is easy 4 stars. The only reason I would say it's not 5 is because it is missing a lot of the dialogue, but what the dialogue gives you is the motivations for so many of the characters and what they do, because you're not just following the Count. You're not just understanding what the Count of Monte Cristo is doing and what his intentions are. You're finding out the motivations of the people who wronged him and the people in their lives now. And that's really, really important because this book, it's a story of revenge. He was falsely imprisoned, and it was just because people were jealous of him. He was a good person. He was a sweet baby-faced 19-year-old who just, life was going well for him and people didn't like it. And so he ends up in this horrible, horrible prison, the Chateau d'If, I believe. I am so sorry to those of you who are French speaking. I never took French. So if I butcher anything, I do sincerely apologize. But when he escaped, he found a huge fortune, and he took on the Count of Monte Cristo as not only his title, but his alternate identity, really. And he said, okay, I'm out. I'm gonna get me some revenge. And he goes after the people who wronged him. But he's not going after them to kill them. No, 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 no. That would be too easy. That would be too good for them. No, he's going to destroy them in the way that will destroy each one the most. And that's different for each person, which is why it's super important to know what their motivations are, because when you know what motivates them, you know what to attack. But the cool thing is that this is not just a story of revenge. This book, I'm gonna go back, even though this is really heavy. This book, really, it is a story of contrasting themes. Yes, you have revenge, but you also have this, he's so rich. I mean, he's like Elon Musk rich, basically, in this book. But he is so generous with some of his wealth for people who deserve it. And that, those are my favorite parts. The parts where that revenge, addled part of his brain basically has kind of receded into the background and something has tugged at his heartstrings. And he's going to reward and he's going to help benefit people who are worth it, who are good people. And even if that means that they are friends or that they are relatives of the people that he's taking his revenge on, because he's taking revenge on the individuals who wronged him, but there's no guilt by association. So he really makes an effort to learn who each person is in this, circle of these people's lives, and to determine whether or not he will go after them, he will help them, he will leave them alone, how he's going to interact with them. One of the most overarching themes, though, is hope. And for a story of revenge, that's really interesting to me. And I think that is part of the reason why I loved this book, because there are some really lovable, just lovable people that he meets. And, he comes to this point where he's having a crisis of faith because he believes himself to be divine justice incarnate. He believes that he is basically God's hand to wield justice. And then he has this crisis of faith at one point of, have I been wrong all this time? Am I not divine providence? Am I evil by seeking revenge? And it's something that he has to contend with, and it's something the reader has to contend alongside him, because you're seeing this revenge plan come together and you're seeing it being implemented and you're seeing what it's doing to these people. And you have to kind of associate their past actions with the people that they are now. And, you kind of have this moral dilemma as you're going along with it of, am I rooting for the Count? Is this really what is this really how it should go? So I think each person is actually going to read this differently. I think each person is going to feel differently about it. But I personally loved it. And because he wasn't seeking physical revenge, and he certainly wasn't after them to kill anyone, I felt that his revenge and his vengeance, because I have a note in here about the difference between revenge and vengeance, his vengeance on them was justified. And he even gave them opportunities basically to repent and turn around. So I cannot talk about this book enough. I can't recommend this book enough. This I will probably end up reading once a year for like the rest of my life. I just feel like that's what's going to happen, and I am totally okay with that. But part of the reason why I got the little guy, aside from just trying to figure out how you could abridge something like that story and still have a great story, was my little tabbies. And this, by the way, is also the first book that I've ever really annotated that is a that was not a nonfiction. This is my first fiction book that I've annotated. So here's my not pristine copy, because for each sticky, I have highlighted and I've written notes. And then on my stickies on the top, you can see, I didn't have enough room on the page, so I wrote sticky notes. Then when I finished, I wrote end summary sticky notes. I went hog wild on this book, and I plan on going on such a deep dive on the full version soon and just doing the same thing. So I may end up with a second copy of this. It's pristine, you know, readable for me, because I'm a crazy person when it comes to this book. So 5-star, go read it. Also, it's Batman. It's Batman. Rich guy, taking revenge, doing good deeds to the good. You know, he's Batman. Come on. Who doesn't love Batman? Our next book, The Manual of Detection by Jedediah Barry. Let's just appreciate this cover for a moment, because honestly, that is 100% why I bought this book. I got this in 2009, I believe. I think at a Borders, which, if that tells you anything, because Borders doesn't exist anymore. But yeah, this cover was it just drew me in. It's so cool looking, and it's dark green, which is like, that's gonna draw me in for sure. And it's a weird, interesting book. All right, so let me read you the blurb, because honestly, I spent 10 minutes recording an explanation of it, and it didn't come anywhere near this. Okay, so I haven't cracked the spine on this, so I'm gonna try to be really gentle with this, even though I've read this twice in the past 2 years, and the spine is still a little creaky. In this tightly plotted, yet mind-expanding debut novel, an unlikely detective, armed only with an umbrella and a singular handbook, must untangle a string of crimes committed in and through people's dreams. In an unnamed city, always slick with rain, Charles Unwin toils as a clerk at a huge, imperious detective agency. All he knows about solving mysteries comes from the reports he's filed for the illustrious detective Travis Sivert. When Sivert goes missing and his supervisor turns up murdered, Unwin is suddenly promoted to detective, a rank for which he lacks both the skills and the stomach. His only guidance comes from his new assistant, who would be perfect if she weren't so sleepy, and from the pithy yet profound Manual of Detection. Think The Art of War as told by Damon Runyon. So the blurb goes on a little bit, but I mean, that encompasses all you need to know about this story to dive right into it. This is the book that I was comparing in my last video, my March wrap-up, where I talked about Invitation to a Beheading from Vladimir Nabokov. That was a fever dream of a book. It was weird, which was the point, but it wasn't weird in a way that I was enjoying it. This one's weird in a way that I really, really enjoyed it. It was a lot easier to follow in this book, even though the bizarre still exists and is still going on. Things happen that don't make sense, and the mystery of the original crime that the book talks about isn't really the mystery that's trying to be solved by the time the book starts, but you're still able to follow at least some sort of coherent string as these things all kind of tie together one way or another. But what I really like about this is that he's promoted to detective, and he's supposed to go out and solve the crime of the century, and instead all he wants to do is find the missing detective so that this guy can keep going back to being a clerk. I just find that charming and endearing, because when I was a kid, one of my dream jobs was to be holed up in a cubicle with just like darkness all around and like one little light shining down on me, and just entering numbers into a spreadsheet 8 hours a day and going home. I was a weird child. I don't know what to say. I also wanted to be a veterinarian. But I understand this poor man who just doesn't want bigger and better. He just wants what's comfortable. And honestly, I can't blame him for that. So I gave The Manual of Detection a really good 4 stars. It's got great pacing right from the beginning. It starts out and just grabs you, and it just keeps building, and it just keeps building. And it's not too long. especially compared to The Count of Monte Cristo, this took me 4 hours in one night to read on my second read through. But I think my first read through years ago was actually pretty much the same. So if you're looking for a really good time, a decent mystery, but just a really charming and weird fever dream world, go for this book. So my next book that I read, I did not have a physical copy of. I actually only had this on ebook, so I'm going to put the artwork here, or maybe here. In one of these places, there will be artwork, and so I will be correct. Anyway, that book was And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie. This book actually was quite short. I read this also in just a few hours in one afternoon. Very, very good story though. I give this a 3-star. This story was not one of the ones that you might expect from Agatha Christie. I think when a lot of people hear her name, they might think first Detective Poirot, they might think Miss Marple, I believe is her name. I'm gonna Google it, and then if that's wrong, I'll cut this part. So they tend to expect a specific detective, looking into the case, but not all of her stories had that, and this is one of the ones that didn't. What's really interesting about this story was, again, it's kind of a story of revenge, and you kind of get that along the way that each person in this scenario has done something very, very wrong. And someone, somewhere, somehow is taking revenge one at a time. What's really cool about it though is it starts out with this little poem about the little soldiers, and it describes the same number of people that have been invited to this island, and it describes the method of disposal of each one. And the crime somehow managed to follow along in mimicry of the poem. And there's a copy of this poem in each person's room. And so, as the reader, right from the beginning that that's what this is about. But it's kind of interesting to see the characters as they're trying to figure out what's going on, and they finally make that connection to the poem that's in all of their rooms, as well as the absolutely sadistic murderer's trick of putting the number of little toy soldiers in a place where everybody can see them. I think for the entire time they stay on the kitchen table, and as each person is killed, one of the soldier toys goes missing. Nobody can figure out how this keeps happening, because they're thinking, okay, if we watch them at all times, nobody will have a chance to remove them, or we'll catch whoever's doing it. And so, each character is getting knocked off one by one in very different ways. And you're learning about each of the characters as time goes on, about what was the thing that they did that is, they're getting their just desserts from. So obviously it's a mystery. I'm not going to spoil anything, but I really, really, really liked this book. I would have given it a 5-star. The only problem I had with it was when it got to the very end and you finally figured out, the whodunit. I didn't have a problem with the whodunit, and I didn't have a problem with the how they did it, except for one little piece of it that, is it possible? Yes. Is it super believable? No. However, I know that the story, Agatha Christie was challenging herself to see if she could write this story. Could she write a story that everybody dies, and yet there's a plausible, believable, rational explanation, even though it seems almost supernatural? And she felt that she did it. I would agree. I think she actually did a very good job of 99% of it. I think there was just that little bit at the end for me where I'm like, yeah, okay, I can see it. That was the only thing that didn't give me the reason to give it that last half of a star to get up to 4, but I would say 3.5. Go read it if you get a chance. Again, it's very short. If you haven't read anything from Agatha Christie, this would be a great place to start, I think. I think you get a really good feel for her writing. I've read a few of her novels before. I think the very first one I read was Murder on the Orient Express. Again, I think there's probably a lot of places you could start with Agatha Christie that are gonna work just fine, but if you're looking for something, try And Then There Were None. I think you'll like it. And now we have come to the last book for April, and I'm not looking forward to this one. So it is Jane Eyre by Charlotte Brontë. The reason I'm not looking forward to this is because I feel like people are going to yell at me because I did not give this 5 stars. I did not give this 4 stars. I gave it 3.5, and I still argue 3 stars is good. 3.5 is very good. I just didn't resonate with the characters in this book like I did with some of the others. A lot of people are probably going to compare it as well to like Pride and Prejudice, and I get that. I don't know if it's really a fair comparison because I feel like very different types of stories were being told, but in the end, they're both around the same time period. They're both, romance novels. They're just from very, very different perspectives, really. Part of what I didn't care for about Jane Eyre was the slow pacing of it at the beginning. There is a huge section of the book, at least it felt huge to me, where you're following her from her childhood through this boarding school before she gets to where the story really mostly takes off. I completely agree that it needed to be told, and you need to understand her childhood, you need to understand what happened to her and how she was raised to really get a full understanding of her character as an adult. And I also know that this was almost an autobiography. This was very, very reflective of Charlotte Bronte's personal experiences, and that's partly why she wanted to write this story, because she wanted to tell the world what was happening in some of these boarding schools, and she did a good job of it, but there was just so much of it that I was literally flipping through trying to figure out when the story was going to move on to the next major story arc. I feel like if that had been shortened and condensed a little bit, this would have been a lot better of a book for me, because she has some very beautiful writing in here. And I like that it's not overly flowery. She's not always trying to sound like she has beautiful writing, but there are some parts that are just really, really lovely. Very much you can appreciate, her skill when it comes to storytelling and her skill when it comes to writing. One of the things though that I found as a shortcoming was she had some very jarring splits between what the narration was about, what the focus was about, and then a completely different scene or a completely different change in focus, and there wasn't enough of a connecting link. What's interesting is when I was reading one of the end notes on a part that I was like, that's a little jarring of a focus split there. The actual end note in the book talks about that exact scene and that it is jarring. And it's actually quoting from Virginia Woolf, who was commenting on that. And it was interesting because she said, and that's why I would say get a copy with end notes, because it really does help, contextualize some of the things that don't make sense necessarily to the modern reader. But Virginia Woolf was saying that was one of the things that is a failure or shortcoming in Charlotte Bronte's writing, is some of those narration jerks, really, where it doesn't have a seamless flow to the next thought. And it was interesting because Virginia Woolf said she really had no great love of Jane Austen, and she felt that Charlotte Bronte was the much better writer, but because of these shortcomings of this sort of fractured writing style at times, she said that is what would be the thing to hold back Charlotte Bronte from becoming as successful and as popular as an author as Jane Austen. To that degree, I will say I believe she was correct. I think some of the struggles that Charlotte Bronte had in her writing style, Jane Austen definitely did not have in Pride and Prejudice, which, like I said, is my only Jane Austen book. This is my only Charlotte Bronte book so far. But I would agree with that assessment. I don't necessarily agree with Virginia Woolf's feeling that Jane Austen was just not a good writer. She didn't really care for Jane Austen at all, and I think it's a little ironic coming from me, considering I talked about in my last video how I felt that Jane Austen had nothing to offer me for most of my life, so it's why it took me so long to read it, to read anything of hers. But I will say, you can see some of the flaws in this book. Now, I completely understand that this is a beloved book by so many people. Is Jane Eyre a girl boss? I don't know, I hate that term. But yeah, sure. I mean, she sticks to her guns. She knows her moral code. She follows her compass. And even for her own happiness, she doesn't stray from it, because she knows that she will lose a part of who she is if she does that. And how can she be happy if she's lost an important part of herself? I think that is a great theme, and I think more people need to have that strength of conviction. Who are you? And how will you not let that go in searching for your happiness? A lot of people will give it up for wealth or for love, or for status, and Jane Eyre refused to do that, and in the end it served her well. I don't really care for happily ever after unless that is exactly what I'm looking for, and I wasn't looking for it with this book, and it gave me a happy ending without a happily ever after. So until you read it, you might not be able to understand exactly what I'm saying. I might not be making a lot of sense, but I would recommend reading this book for sure. I would say if you're on the fence and you only want to read one or the other, I would go with Pride and Prejudice. But if you have time to read both, definitely pick this one up. Thank you so much for joining me for my April wrap-up. We got to talk about, I mean, technically it was 4 with the Agatha Christie book, but you know, I got a 5th in there with my little abridged Monte Cristo version. But I really appreciate you hanging out with me and listening to me talk about the books that I got to read and how I felt about them. I highly, highly encourage you to read, if you cannot read anything else for the rest of your life, read The Count of Monte Cristo. But other than that, pick up a book, find something you think you'd enjoy, and dive in. Share your comments down below, what you thought of these books, or what book you're excited to share with everybody else, and I will see you in the next one.